How did a burnt-out college student create one of the best games ever? And can anybody stop him? Stardew Valley is a perfect game, and every year a slew of new titles look to knock this king off its hill. And none of them have managed to do it. It's been a little over 5 years now since the original release of this game, and when I talk to other Stardew Valley fans, 99% of the time I am met with glowing reviews and fond memories of their time spent in Pelican Town and its surrounding environs. This game has remained at the top of the heap for a long time, making its way to every console imaginable and selling over 10 million copies. Even though Eric Barone, aka Concerned Ape, is a solo developer, he's provided a player experience that has struck a chord with long-standing fans of the farm life sim genre. The retro-inspired pixelated art style immediately hits you right in the nostalgia. But don't be fooled by the pared-down graphics. There is so much to love about this game. Allow me a moment to gush. In the beginning, characters and people you meet are standoffish, almost curt in their interactions. But as you build your reputation with them, they open up to you more and more, revealing deep backstories with ideals, fears, and aspirations that make them feel real and human. The corporate threat that Pelican Town faces from Joja Mart has real-world echoes that many small towns have faced in the modern age, giving this world an uncanny sense of realism. And escaping the corporate grind at the start of the game mirrors Barone's own experience with career options, which drove him to make Stardew Valley: fishing. The farming and resource gathering activities like fishing and mining are fleshed out in ways that battle the monotony of these kinds of tasks. And with the implementation of professions and specializations, each player can go about completing their goals in their own preferred way. And the game injects just the right amount of fantasy to make it a great escape from the real world as well. Whether it's helping the Junimos restore the community center or fighting our way through mines and caverns, our role in the community is so much more than that of a simple farmer. As if that wasn't enough though, a talented and dedicated group of modders have emerged within the community, enabling us to play out our wildest dreams for the game, at least for PC players. So even if I can't marry Linus originally, there's someone out there who can help me with that. And there is so much to love about this game, I couldn't possibly cover it all. From online multiplayer to new farm styles, Stardew Valley has evolved and flourished into the most intricate game of its kind. Now, farm simulation games have been a staple subgenre of life simulation games since the earliest days of gaming. From Wabbit on the Atari 2600, released in 1982, to 1993's Sim Farm for PC, the simple routine of caring for one's crops and tending to various farm animals has always had a strong appeal. Harvest Moon 64, released in 1999, dominated the genre for 15 years leading up to the release of Stardew Valley. Wait, 15 years? That's right. If you were a fan of the genre in the 90s and 2000s, this was the game that you most fondly remembered. It introduced core concepts that would become pillars of the genre as we know it today. The storyline is a familiar one. Grandpa has died and you've inherited a struggling farm with little to no money to your name. You have 3 years to turn things around and make your little homestead profitable. And although Harvest Moon 64 was bound to have some flaws, whether it was due to the limitations of hardware or software, or the limits of gaming innovation in the 90s, it was still the farm life sim game. But over the years, this popular franchise drifted away from many of these core ideas, and other contenders at the time were looking to dethrone Harvest Moon 64. Fans of the genre waited and waited for something to come along that just hit the same way that Harvest Moon 64 did. And for 15 long years, nothing did. Until Stardew Valley. The hurdle that Barone had to overcome was a large one. To accomplish such a feat, he must have had some secret understanding of the inner workings of these kinds of games, right? In Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, Jason Schreier dedicates a whole chapter to Barone and his process of creating Stardew Valley. Barone had this to say: "I just wanted to play another game that was exactly like the first 2 Harvest Moons, but just with different people and a different map. I could have played that forever, different iterations of that same thing, but it didn't exist." Wait, what? So Barone was just trying to make a Harvest Moon clone? That doesn't exactly sound like the impassioned vision of a creator pushing the bounds of what this genre could be. But despite this kind of basic vision, he still managed to create a game that took the genre to new heights. Even though this quote by Barone may seem to be a dead end, I think it's actually pretty important, and we're going to keep coming back to it. One thing it does reveal is that big innovation isn't necessarily the way to create a great farm life sim game. Barone perfected a formula, but was careful not to change it. He could have done something crazy like incorporate roguelike elements. You finish your farm and then sell it to start a new farm in a new town. Or what if the game brought in first-person shooter elements? Not only are you trying to rejuvenate the town, you're also trying to protect it from hordes of zombies or post-apocalyptic raiders. Ooh. What if we introduce battle royale elements? Each season, only the top farmer continues on until only one supreme farmer is left. Remember the Harvest Moon franchise and how it eventually deviated from its original vision? This is the perfect example of how too much innovation can cost you fans. Big changes might be innovative, but messing with the core pillars of the genre will quickly ruin the charm of a farm life sim game. Let's take a deeper look at the development process. At the time, Eric Barone, a self-proclaimed introvert, was simply a burnt-out college graduate, dissatisfied with his job prospects and trying to build up his resume. He figured he could make a small Harvest Moon clone in about 5 to 6 months that would bring in some money and get his feet wet in the gaming industry. You see, Barone had several interviews in the Seattle area, but nothing ever came of them. And arguably, it's these real-life experiences that inspired the core of Stardew Valley's story that ultimately shot it to superstardom. It may be the case that in order to create a game that allows you to escape from the concerns of real life, you must first have a life worth escaping. So in 2011, he started his simple game, which he called Sprout Valley, and the obsession took over. His 5 to 6 month time frame started to creep up another month, another 2 months. Barone worked a lot, but the game's scope grew and grew. He was constantly iterating on the game, improving the art, music, mechanics, code to create a better and more polished project each time. In 2012, he launched his website for the game, now known as Stardew Valley. The forums slowly grew as he made contacts with longtime Harvest Moon fans through Reddit, and monthly updates started going out for the game. In the fall, Barone started looking at Steam's Greenlight project as a way to get his game out to fans. Remember that he had no experience in the games industry, and as a solo developer, didn't have the same kind of contacts that other studios might have. Luckily, Finn Bryce of Chucklefish, the publisher for Starbound, approached Barone to help with getting Stardew Valley published, which would leave Barone to focus solely on the creative aspects of the game. That means all art, music, story, and dialogue were done by Eric himself. Now, even though they got the Steam greenlight in May of 2013, Barone felt that his game wasn't ready yet. He found himself participating in a panic cycle of hacking and slashing the game apart, redoing and rebuilding pieces from the ground up. And even though money was getting tight, he decided not to release his game in early access. It's almost an expectation nowadays that games will be released to the public in their unfinished or underfinished states. And even though this would have injected some much-needed cash into Barone's pockets, this was not the route Stardew Valley chose to go. Barone was starting to lose faith. There were long stretches where he was unable to work on the game, and people were starting to push him harder to release the game as it was. But Barone persisted. For 4 years, he sat by himself at his computer, talking to only a handful of contacts. In order to maintain complete creative control as a solo dev, he had to embrace solitude and the loneliness that came with it. No quality assurance teams and no testers. aside from the few roommates and friends who had played the game, all bugs and their fixes were handled by one man. So, after a handful of years in development and countless hours, Barone released his game in February of 2016 for $15. Which is a steal. Unlike many other games in the genre, it was originally released exclusively to PC as opposed to console. This broadened its reach, with over 400,000 copies sold across Steam and GOG.com in the first 2 weeks, and more than 1 million copies sold in less than 2 months later. And now, even years after its initial launch, Barone has released dozens of updates to the base game and taken over publishing for most platforms. All in all, a solid development. He set out to create a game that emulated the formula from the early Harvest Moon games and achieved just that and so much more. So that has me wondering, what does it take to dethrone Stardew Valley? Is there a way to take the genre to a new level? Or is Stardew Valley so perfect that not even a AAA studio like Nintendo or Ubisoft could ever hope to challenge it? As I look at this process, a few key points stand out to me. Firstly, Barone was relentless in maintaining his creative control over the process. A very important part of figuring out what your game is also knowing what your game is not. Barone had seen other farm life sim franchises drift away from their original charm, losing fans along the way. And since his original goal was to make a game that was exactly like the early Harvest Moon games, he had to make deliberate choices about what would and would not be in his game. Secondly, he was dedicated to releasing the game only once it was ready, even if this meant working to the point of burnout and resisting the temptation to make quick and easy cash grabs. Exposing your artistic endeavors to criticism is already a brave and difficult thing to do, but Barone was his own greatest critic. Often described as a perfectionist by close friends, the many iterations the game went through is a testament to this. It takes time to make a game like this, and even more so when you're a solo developer and it's your first major project. It might seem obvious that the way to make a good game is through creative integrity and only launching your game once it's absolutely perfect, but these two ideals often go to the wayside in an industry full of deadlines, crunch, and investors to keep happy. Nonetheless, anyone who wants to play at the same table as Barone must get these two things right. But if you actually want to beat Barone and dethrone Stardew Valley, you're gonna need something bigger. The most important thing that stood out to me when looking at Barone's process was that he created a robust game. As players, we always want more. More dialogue, more events, more characters, more. Content is king. But how do you provide content at the volume that fans want? I don't want to wait another 15 years for my next hit of this addiction. So what if we could speed up the rate at which fresh content is made available? I believe that the answer is community-generated content. Now, this might seem counterintuitive to the creative control and vision that needs to be maintained in order to create a cohesive core game experience, but I believe these concepts can work in harmony. Once you have an amazing game like Stardew Valley, I don't believe there's any danger in allowing players to contribute to it. Earlier, we touched on the amazing modding community. They have done an excellent job of providing modded content for the PC, but very few people possess the skill set necessary to create mods. In order to overcome this barrier to entry, I think we need some inspiration from an unlikely place. That's right, Mario Maker. Imagine a Mario Maker-esque toolkit baked into the game that would enable players of all skill levels to create unique characters with their own dialogue and story arc. Rather than editing platforming levels, you'd edit dialogue trees and event triggers. This player-generated content would then be published to a central hub where it could be rated and enjoyed by the entire community. Want to remix your next playthrough with all new characters and story options? Go for it. Now, this is by no means an easy task, and I imagine the coding would be a nightmare. However, it would give the game tremendous appeal and staying power by providing endless iterations of the core experience, just like Barone wanted when he first started development on Stardew Valley. So, who will take up this challenge? I suppose it's possible that the game to dethrone Stardew Valley would be Stardew Valley. However, coding dry nuts and bolts systems is the kind of work that Barone absolutely hates. So this seems unlikely. I can always dream. And maybe one day we'll get a farm life sim game that we can truly play forever and ever.